In this module, we will take a quick look at the different sources of information you can turn to in order to get the information you need. We first discussed primary data sources, and in a later module, we will review secondary data sources. In general, there are two types of data, primary and secondary. Primary data are those that are collected by the researcher from primary sources, that is, human respondents. Secondary data are those that have been previously collected by someone else, such as a commercial research supplier or a government agency. Clearly, primary data will be more useful because they are tailored to precisely meet the researcher's needs. At the same time, they are also much more expensive to collect. For example, if the researcher wants to determine how consumers will react to a proposed new product, he or she can collect primary data by conducting a focus group or a survey of the target market. Of course, this will be relatively expensive and time-consuming. Primary data can be divided into two types, qualitative and quantitative. The two are completely different, and it's important that you understand the distinction between them and when they're used. Qualitative data or research consists of rich and detailed information about a small sample of people. The sample is selected not randomly but based on convenience, and it's low cost, though it's not projectable to the population from which the sample is drawn, because it's not a random sample. Therefore, you can learn a lot about a small group of people through qualitative research, but you can't project the findings to the population at large. Quantitative data, on the other hand, is based on large random samples and representative samples of consumers. It is quantifiable because it is based on structured questionnaires or mechanical observation, which yields numbers that can easily be analyzed statistically. And because of the large representative samples, it is conclusive information. That is, you can use the findings to project it to the population from which the sample is drawn. On the downside, quantitative data is extremely expensive and is generally inflexible in the sense that once the survey is launched or once the data collection effort has started, it is really impossible to change the questions that you're asking. So what are some of the common uses of qualitative information? Well, one of the most common uses is to help design a quantitative study. So when you are conducting a quantitative study, such as a survey, you need to have very clearly defined product attributes. You need to know what the product benefits are. You need to know how people use the product, and so on. And all this can come from qualitative research that you conduct before designing the survey. You can also learn how people talk about these products and attributes, the particular language that consumers use, which often is very different from the language that we think they use or the language that manufacturers might use. So you can use this qualitative research to develop appropriate wording of questions in a survey. And finally, you can look at qualitative research to find the range of possible answers that you might get in a survey, because you can then create categories of those answers and include them in the survey itself. So you can anticipate what people can say. So all of this makes it very useful to conduct qualitative research before designing a quantitative study. You can also conduct research that is qualitative after conducting a quantitative study in order to get insights into any findings that you didn't expect. So for example, if you run a survey and you find that in the survey people mentioned a particular use of the product that you had totally not expected or thought about, you could run a focus group or do some other qualitative research after the survey to figure out exactly what this use is, or how people are actually using this, or how important it is. So that's another very important and interesting use of qualitative research. And finally, you can brainstorm for ideas using qualitative research. And this is particularly useful because qualitative research is not structured. It can be quite unstructured and freeform. And so it becomes an ideal method to develop creative strategy, to think about new ideas for products or campaigns. Some of the common methods used in qualitative research include focus groups and depth interviews, expert surveys, and so on, and we'll discuss many of them later on in the class. Now, what are the common uses of quantitative information? Well, quantitative information is very important in measuring or benchmarking consumer perceptions and other aspects such as attitudes, behavior, satisfaction, and so on. and to track these changes over time to see how consumers are moving or evolving over time in their attitudes and in their behavior. It's also useful to predict consumer response to changes in the marketing mix, changes in product price, promotion, and distribution. So you can anticipate how people might respond to a price cut or a change in the product formulation or a new advertising campaign, and so on. And finally, it's used to conclusively develop segmentation, targeting, and positioning strategies. So a major use of quantitative information is to develop or identify segments that can be targeted or would be the best prospects for a product, and to develop a positioning strategy for targeting those particular segments. Some of the methods used in collecting quantitative data include, of course, surveys, but also panels, people meters, UPC scanners, single source data, and so on. And we'll discuss more of these later on in the class. So a big question that you should ask at the start of any research project is whether qualitative data is appropriate given the objectives or quantitative data is appropriate. So let's look at some examples of each and help you understand the distinction between the two and when one would be appropriate and when the other would be appropriate. Here's an example. Pennzoil Quaker State, which markets Total Shine polisher and cleaner products, wants to come up with ideas for creatively communicating the product's benefits through a TV commercial. Should it do qualitative or quantitative research? Well, here you really need to look at the creative strategy and figure out and think about new ideas to communicate the benefits through the advertising. So this doesn't really call for a large-scale survey because you will not have the flexibility that you will have in qualitative research to probe different ideas, to get people to think about different ways of doing this. So a qualitative research would be appropriate in this case. Here's another example. 2 different commercials for Total Shine have now been developed. Management wants to know which of the 2 will be more effective in favorably influencing target customers' preferences for Total Shine. So here the problem is very clearly defined. You have what you want to find out is the effect of advertising on consumers' preferences. So it's not so much about creative thinking or thinking outside the box, etc., but it's more about showing people different ads and seeing how they respond to them and measuring their responses in terms of customer preferences. So for this, a quantitative survey will be much more useful because it will allow you to conclusively say that commercial A is better than commercial B or vice versa. Whereas if you do qualitative research, even if you have clear preferences for one or the other, you couldn't really project it to the population. So you would have to do a conclusive study later on in any case.